While going through my emails, I saw a request that appeared simple enough. The corporation needed someone to assist a cleanup worker. After a supernatural issue was resolved, someone needed to take care of the mess. Most of the time, weaker agents pulled double duties and cleaned the scenes using magic. However, the office managers felt like using magic was a waste of resources. They started to hire half-breeds, or humans, to take care of the mess, instead of manual labor. The issue with that is sometimes a scene wasn't fully cleared, or a monster who caused trouble came back to get a free meal. Scene cleaners were being targeted, so now contract workers were getting paid to be with them as they worked. I accepted the job and arrived at an old rundown factory in the middle of a field. The building was huge, and must have provided most of the jobs for this local small town at one point. I greeted a few agents on their way out. They had just finished killing a monster and had made quite a bit of a mess. The factory had been a cooking oil packaging plant. We were requested to save any usable bottles, and then clean up the spilled oil so it didn't seep into the ground and affect the local wildlife. After I got the basic rundown, I came across a pair I didn't expect to see again. Someone called my name, and I turned to see who it was. The agents waited by them, ready to bring the pair along after they were done with our small meeting. "We were nearby, so I want to drop these off for you," a sweet voice said as her pointed spider legs clicked across the parking lot. Honey had bleached her hair. It suited her. She wore a long, flowing dress that covered part of her spider half. Joey was next to her, finding it hard to keep at her pace. He had shaved his face, trimmed his hair, and his smile showed off a new set of braces. He had changed a lot in such a short amount of time. Honey handed me a package of baked goods I wanted to eat on the spot. I shoved a small cheesecake bit into my mouth, shocked over how good it tasted. "Did you make these?" I asked her. She proudly nodded, hands smugly on her hips. "I started cooking meals for agents while they're in the field. I'm very good at making soups, but I prefer baking. Who knew such a simple job would be so enjoyable?" I looked between them. Honey had put on a little bit of weight, which was good for her. I didn't realize how thin she was for her species until I saw her a bit healthier. I had a feeling she would get bored of cooking, but at least Honey was able to explore options, instead of her limited life choices from before. "Are you two dating?" I asked, wondering if Joey got his wish he risked the entire world for. "No, just friends for now," he admitted. He needed to work on himself a little bit before he dated anyone. Plus, he didn't want to pressure Honey into a relationship when his taste was a bit on the weird side. "I don't feel as if I owe you anything else. If you want more food, call me. And don't die. I've heard you had a few close calls recently. You are a small and weak human. Stop doing things that are not meant for you to take care of." I thanked Honey for the treats and her advice. I wondered who had been talking about what I had been up to, and what kind of information she had heard. It wasn't as if I was a talented contract worker who was well known by agents and other workers. I just barely scrapped by most days. They left so I could get to work and meet the scene cleaner. I was not looking forward to mopping up gallons of oil, but it could be worse. I started walking around in the empty, cracked parking lot. Plants had begun to take over from the lack of use. The building had sat empty for at least 2 years. Whatever had happened back then had caused the company to go under. All the equipment had been left behind, as well as the products. It was a perfect kind of place for creatures to make a home inside of. I wasn't certain what the corporation wanted with a bunch of probably expired cooking oil, but they were paying 2 people to help transport it. My coworker had arrived before me. She already got to work planning out the best way to start moving pallets of bottles without a forklift. I'm sure I could figure out how to drive one, but the inside of the building had too much litter for it to be safe to do so. I waved to get her attention. She came over so we could introduce each other. "I'm Rory. I heard your name's Richmond?" she asked after we shook hands. She was average height, with straight black hair cut at her shoulders. She didn't wear any kind of makeup and had simple work clothes. Her voice sounded even, almost lacking emotion. I could tell she was human at a quick glance. "What's the dumpster for?" I asked her, nodding towards a steel container by the open loading dock doors. "Oh, it's to transport things. I've used one before. We just need to dump stuff inside and it gets magically transported to where it needs to go. I was told that anything that hasn't been nailed down is to be put inside the dumpster. Someone else will come by and break down the bigger equipment, take care of larger items we can't lift." I nodded along, arms crossed, wondering just how long this would take. It was warm for the season. I regretted wearing a sweater that day. This sounds like a Lupa job. Scrapping whatever can be used to the last bolt and using manual human labor to do it. I think he's underpaying us for this job. Did anyone mention what kind of creature had been taken care of before we got here? I asked her. She slowly shook her head and gave the building another look over. I didn't know how long she had worked as a scene cleaner. Rory seemed to share my concerns. "I've heard Lupa doesn't have the best reputation. Do you think there's a reason behind us being the ones picked for this?" Her voice was even, but her real message was clear. I shrugged, wishing I had a solid answer. Knowing him, we're either bait or not important enough for a real job. Let's be extra careful and stay focused. While in the building, don't leave my side, okay? I hoped I sounded more capable than I looked. Rory gave me a silent thumbs up, with an expression that made me feel like she wasn't very impressed by me. She listened to the idea of sticking together. We only had a cart and a dolly to start moving things to the dock. The container was the same height as the dock, making it simple to just toss things out of the open door. It was a bit fun seeing whatever we unloaded sink and disappear somewhere else. Magic caused a lot of problems in the wrong hands, but it was pretty useful. We worked for hours, barely speaking to each other. Rory wasn't able to lift the heavier objects and asked me for help. Her tone was cold and direct. It made me think she didn't like me much. If I was on this job alone, I would have gotten distracted. But with her help, we got an area by the docks clear in a few hours. We both silently agreed on a break. We stood by the open bay doors, the wind cooling us down. The sun would set in the next hour or so. We should leave before then. I wasn't going to risk being here in the dark. The old factory did not have power, even if we did want to keep working. We should pack up soon. There isn't a time limit on this cleanup, I mentioned. Rory took a quick glance in my direction and nodded. Finish off the small section by the doors. You look awful. We both had been covered with dirt and leftover grime. I smiled, trying to take her words the best I could. Thanks, I said, hoping I didn't sound overly sarcastic. She seemed to realize how rude her last comment was. You look worn out, she corrected. I agreed with her there. I had been working a bit too hard recently to try to pay down a medical debt and afford food at the same time. I've heard the term contract worker, but I don't know what kind of job that is. She was being nice enough to pretend to care about my personal life, or she was looking to switch careers. I doubted she would last as a contract worker, but at the same time, I worried for her safety if she stayed in her current position. Contract work can be anything. Sometimes we take down a weaker threat, or we're called in to just investigate a location. We basically do anything agents don't have the time for. She looked bored. We stared off into the open field, watching the breeze play across the tall grass. I took a deep inhale and then held it for a moment. There was magic in this place. The air outside was clean and fresh. Not so much for inside the factory. We soon discovered there had been a fire in the middle of the building at some point that tore through the ceiling. There had been some attempts to clean up the heavily damaged parts at some point. We had avoided that area, wanting to clean it up last. For some reason, it felt odd being within those walls. It was as if we were being watched, and yet I didn't see anything odd or sense a creature lurking around. What got you into supernatural cleanup? I asked her. It's not really a job you stumble into. She debated if she wanted to answer, showing I might have asked an insensitive question. I sort of did stumble into this. My boss was attacked by an infected corpse. I couldn't save him. He's still alive, but who knows if he's still the same person. I frowned, realizing I should have kept my mouth shut. Normally, the people who have a bad experience with the supernatural want to have revenge on the creatures who hurt them or their loved ones. She noticed how uncomfortable I looked, and tried to smile. Her expression ended up appearing as a grimace. If he becomes a different person, that just means I'll make a new friend, she told me. That was a good way to see things. We had only known each other for a short while, and yet I greatly respected her. She may not have the strength needed to fight monsters, but she was strong in other ways that mattered. You know, contract work sounds a lot like my job. Recently I cleaned up a hoarder house, dealt with a gross body-filled warehouse, and some idiot trashed a department store. It took a full week to clean up. My body tensed at that last comment. I froze, not even risking moving my eyes to look at her. Surely there had to be more than one ruined department store around, right? I also had to spend days helping replant trees in a forest while stronger people filled in those massive holes. The easiest job I had was to break down the body of a large bird. The tricky part was a half-rabbit girl trying to come over to steal pieces. I know it pays my bills, but it'd be nice if agents didn't leave such a mess behind. She sighed. Sweat started to build at the base of my neck. I thought back to all of those events, and realized Rory had been one of the cleanup workers I saw in the park. What else had I left behind for her to take care of? She didn't sound angry, but she was the type to not show much of any kind of emotion. Huh, you've been busy. I tried to sound casual. My strained tone gave away I was trying to hide something. I felt her eyes on me. Her gaze was so intense as she studied my reaction, as if slowly putting the pieces together. I wonder what happened here to get this place shut down, I said, trying to change the subject. There was a fire that killed 63 people, she replied. My head turned towards her, wondering how she knew that. Rory explained that she had looked up the name of the company while she waited for me to arrive. I suddenly felt odd standing so close to where so many people had met their end. The darkness had overtaken most of the factory, making it feel like a wall of dread was at our back. We did not have a lot of sunlight left. Let's just finish the space and head out, Rory offered. I agreed, then we rolled up our sleeves to get back to work. Since we worked all day without any issues, we had gotten too comfortable inside the building. The sun was still up, and we stayed near the dock doors. It felt safe. Rory cleaned off a desk near the loading doors. 3 doors lined the walls that were labeled as storage and shipping offices. Once the desk was cleaned off, she reached over to open the door to the cleaning supplies. I looked up to watch her pause, staring off into the room with a single blinking light bulb casting shadows inside. Someone tall and thin stood near the back of the room. A harsh smell, like something burning, and rancid decay filled the air. The figure turned its blackened head, a set of glowing orange eyes fixed in our direction. She silently closed the door, holding it firmly shut without any other reaction to the horror inside. Rory was my hero in that moment. She stiffly turned to carefully walk away from what she had just seen. A rumble started deep within the building. A burst of power exploded through the room, nearly knocking me from my feet. Rory froze, trying to assess the threat levels. I recovered and tried to go over to her, but it was far too late. Reality cracked between us, as small rips between worlds appeared hovering in the air around us. Rory had become trapped inside a different version of the factory. The magic in this area had fused with the pain and regret of the ones who had died, to create a small, alternate version of the building. The small opening showed snapshots of the darker place, but none were large enough for me to fit through. I found an opening to look through, and spotted Rory running away from a shadow. I had brought along a knife, just in case. Carefully, I tossed it through the small opening for her. She didn't even break her stride as she grabbed it off the ground, and then disappeared deeper into the other side. I grabbed the side of an opening to pull, trying to get through. I only hurt my hands. A burst of magic shot out, jolting my system. I pulled my hands back, mind racing. I was scared for her. She was human, and I didn't know what threat we faced. For once, my phone worked. I called the corporation office to try to explain the situation. Unfortunately, no agents were available. They would send one the moment they could, and I hated how overworked everyone at the corporation was. I was told to leave the area and wait for help. Like hell I was going to do that. I refused to leave someone behind to save my own skin. After the call, I ran deeper into the building, and towards the blackened area from the fire. I guess that was a more stable doorway to the other side, and I was right. My feet sank down into the burned floor, the building swallowing up another victim. The smell of burnt flesh and steel overtook my senses as I was dragged downwards. I got dumped into a dark place. My eyes slowly adjusted. Using a small pen light, I scanned the area looking for Rory. My heart nearly stopped when I saw a figure on the ground. Thankfully, it wasn't her. The body was a twisted mass of burnt flesh, with cuts along the front. She must have attacked it and stunned it long enough to get away. Without any doubt, this place was a haunting. Ghosts were tricky to deal with. No one really knew if there was an afterlife or not. Ghosts were pure magic fused with a deceased human's regrets and memories. They weren't actually lost souls wandering around. Since they were made of magic, most creatures couldn't harm them, and ghosts drained magic to become stronger. Some specialized agents dealt with hauntings, but the number of them was low, and simply could not take care of all the requests, causing most hauntings to be sealed away. Our outlook of getting saved appeared darker by the second. I carefully walked looking for any traces of Rory. My small light source guided the way. Since the figures were the same color and texture as the blackened equipment, I didn't notice one until it came screeching towards me. My body acted on reflex, through the fear. Before the burnt, curled hands reached my neck, I lashed out and punched it in the face. I focused on dispersing the magic that made up its body. It exploded into a burst of smoke, the traces of magic sinking back into the ground. That hurt. A lot. My teeth stung in a way I had never felt before. I doubted I could simply punch away all the ghosts here. My body would give up, and I could not do the same to a larger, bigger threat. As I was recovering, I heard a scream. Wasting no time, I raced toward it, praying Rory was all right. To my horror, I saw her too far away to help. Her legs became tangled in a mess of empty bottles on the floor. She slipped on some of the spilled oil, landing hard. So many of those creatures were on her. More appeared in front of me, and I struggled to knock them away. I gritted my teeth, refusing to let another person die because I was too late to save them. For some reason, the crowd of creatures around her stepped aside. She stood up, body limp and eyes distant. She was alive, but not in good shape. The dark magic of this place had possessed her. But why? She took a few uneven steps, the dark creatures following behind. She made her way to an office along the far wall of the factory. I struggled to get there. So many of those things came at me. Claws ripped at my clothing, and dark hands pressed on my exposed skin, leaving slight burns. All my muscles screamed in pain as I forced myself to keep going. Each figure blown apart would reform in a few minutes. We needed to get out of here fast. Rory had broken down the office door, letting the dark creatures flood inside. When I arrived, she was standing over top of a haggard man, knife raised. From the looks of it, he had been here for a while. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, and his body weak from lack of meals. He begged Rory not to kill him, even though he already had one foot in the grave. "Rory!" I shouted, knowing I would not reach her before she drove the knife down. A slightly pained expression came over her face. I thought I heard a snap, but then she returned to normal, confused and in pain. When she broke down the door, she must have hurt her arm, maybe broken a bone or two. I stood shocked. I'd never heard of someone shaking off a possession so easily. "Are you alright?" I asked her from the doorway. Slowly, she nodded, her mind catching up. She took a few steps away from the man, lowering the knife to her side. "Seems like he's the one who owned the company. Instead of safety, he focused on profits. When the accident happened, he hired someone who could put a magic protection on him, so none of the ones who died could kill him," Rory explained in a tired voice. The building rumbled again. There was going to be another shift, and I wondered if we could use it to get out, or if we would become trapped here forever. The man sobbed on the ground, tearfully begging to be forgiven. "What do you want to do?" I asked her, and nodded towards him. "I think we need to stay out of this," she commented coldly. She didn't want to kill the man, but she didn't want to save him. I agreed with her. I reached out my hand to take hers, but the creatures around us didn't like our answer. They came down on us. I shouted at her to leave as I fought back, trying to clear a pathway. Since I was taking apart the ghosts, an imbalance of magic happened. This small world affected the other factories. A rumbling shook the place so much that the factory started to fall apart. If we did get to the right side, we risked getting killed in a collapse. Suddenly, a rip opened at my feet. I'd become separated from Rory again. Through the rips, I saw her racing along, avoiding ghosts as she headed for the bay dock doors. I ran to meet her there, heart racing when I saw an opening large enough for her to get through. It started to close, and I reached out to take the sides, using all my strength to keep it open. She was a few feet away, but had too many creatures after her. They would catch up before she got through. If I let go, the opening would close. I tried to think of something to do to help, but she already had a plan. She kicked an unstable pallet to knock over a barrel of oil, causing it to spill along the floor. She then took out a metal pen from her pocket, which turned into a small blade with a press of her finger. She drove the blade down, and a spark of magic came from it, lighting the oil in a flash. Was cooking oil this flammable? I suppose the magic she used caused it to be. The monsters backed off, screaming in fear from the flames. Rory then slid along the floor, using the oil to launch herself outside, and directed into the dumpster. I let go of the opening, it shutting with such force that it knocked me back, also into the dumpster and almost on top of her. The fall knocked the wind from my lungs. We both stayed there for a while, in pain and needing a long break from what we just went through. An agent Rory knew found us. He opened the dumpster and instantly started to make a fuss. His brown hair was a mess from the job he just raced from, and his golden eyes were fuming. He carefully helped her to her feet as he ranted. "Happened again? I swear this wasn't a cleanup job. They just want to use you as bait. Why are you doing this job? You're human. Whatever money problems you have, I'll find a way to take care of it." He clearly cared for her in a big brother sort of way. I thought he would boil over, but Rory stayed calm at his outburst. "I'm perfectly fine to keep working," she said. "You'll die if you do," he snapped back at her. "It's my decision," she firmly said. He shrank back a little, embarrassed by his reaction. She carefully took his hand, causing the agent to look away. "I'm just worried about you," he sighed, calming down a little. "I know. Thank you for that." I noticed a small hint of redness start at his ears. Quickly, he shook it off, and finally noticed I was there. He said that since this was an active area, our cleanup duties were finished. The building was going to be sealed away until someone could handle the ghosts inside. He was going to get Rory's arm looked at, and offered to get me home. I was going to take him up on the offer, when my phone rang. "Lucas can't sleep. Come over to help with the puppet show. I need 4 arms," August said on the other line. I could not explain my sudden plans to the agent, and told him someone was coming to get me. Within the next few minutes, I was stolen away, and learning lines for a grand bedtime story I assumed August wrote. It took us an hour to finally get Lucas asleep. Sure, doing silly voices was embarrassing, but I would do almost anything for that kid. We sat next to his bed watching him sleep, and I quietly told August about my day. He tried to pay attention, but soon also nodded off. With some effort, I got him into bed next to Lucas. August had bought a massive racing car bed for him. I wasn't sure if he got such a large bed because he wanted Lucas to grow into it, or if he got it for the nights his adopted son needed a grown-up to sleep next to him, to chase away the bad memories. I studied the room to look at how well it had filled out. Lucas had lots of toys, and a small desk for his coloring. We had set up a small tank for a jumping spider he named Lucy. Somehow, Lucas hadn't become spoiled with all this. He was a good kid, who shared with his classmates and always made sure others had things before he did. August made sure Lucas was in counseling, but we didn't know what happened to Lucas between the ages of 2 and now. He simply would not speak of it. Small scars on his knees and a slight limp when he ran revealed the trauma the poor thing had went through in his short life. Whatever happened, he was a strong kid, and was recovering. I was proud of him. It helped that August was doing all the right things as a parent, but it was taking a toll on him. I took a glance at his internal magic, seeing it flickering a little weaker than before. He should have more than he did. The man had been working hard, and was using up too much of himself, without giving himself a chance to recover. The corporation would gladly work him to the last drop if he let them. It felt like August was putting all this effort into being the perfect father, because there was something he couldn't change. He wasn't human, and that would affect Lucas someday. I had always known my mother was different. She was human and yet could control magic and knew of supernatural creatures. I didn't know how I would be able to deal with it if I lived a normal life. Then, one day, everything I knew changed. I didn't know what the future held for them. Deep down, I had a feeling they would be alright. If I wanted to live to see that, I really needed to start picking less dangerous jobs. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.